Chapter 7 The Cretan Bull. Sophie channeled mildness where she stood trembling in her husband's awkward embrace. A volcano quaked beneath her slick skin. She needed to regain control and end this conflict with Darius. Divorce papers may get signed, and then what? If she still felt something for him, like she was at the moment, she'd be lost. "Let go," she said, "and get a grip." Darius tightened his hold. "Darius!" Sophie was shocked and more than shivery. "In a minute," he said. He scooted backward, casting thunderbolts at the brush line. He raised his stick. Objections rose to Sophie's mind, but she stuffed them. Meeting his split-second glance, she owned the truth. She loved her husband's overblown protectiveness. She wanted Darius to touch her. He must know, considering she wasn't slapping him off. This wasn't victim-shaming, not at all, she told herself. Sophie wasn't a victim. She could get away from her husband, scream, but his warm, muscled arms satisfied the cravings that had her wanting to produce little Greek gods and goddesses in the first place. "Those animals are devils," he said with a rough voice to slay her defenses. Darius was the devil, and Sophie refused to subject herself to further temptation. Head games had gone far enough. "Hands off, now," she insisted before she exploded. He dropped his hold. His eyes misted. Was he wounded or worried? She didn't care. Sophie shouldn't care, and yet his puppy dog look worked its magic. Her insides twisted with more want than she wanted. Soothing what irked him had been one of her greatest joys, but the cost of joy was too high. Strengthened, she moved toward the thicket. "No, don't," he cautioned. "It's not worth the risk." "What risk?" "There may be some flesh-eating beast in there." Sophie ignored him. Distance is what she needed, and exactly what she couldn't have on this blasted island. She ached to have his hands on her. She craved more than hands, and far more than the desperate coupling that would likely result if she gave him the slightest green light. Darius jumped in front of her. Monsters hunt in packs. His wide eyes, furious and fantastic, sought hers. Who was afraid now? Sophie's shivers shivered. Her husband was a total ham, but his excess bravado filled those gaps. Sophie felt too keenly. Energy crackled between them, but too bad. She gave her head a shake to stave off the fluffy-headed effects. "Don't be ridiculous," she choked. She was speaking to herself, obviously, and she'd better. Giving in to animal instinct is what got her into this ill-fated love connection. She whisked the remnants of his fingerprints off her flesh, like that was possible. Need surged like a raging tide of, "Please, no." But logic came too late. Her engines were fired. Darius was already ready. What now? The ruined hut or anywhere moderately accommodating would be welcome with her insides jellying. She'd suffered the same malady, tossing ethics aside when she discovered Darius got scared at scary movies. 2 coworkers discussing business over dinner, then taking in a movie, and it was time she dropped the benefit of the doubt. "You're setting me up," she accused. "That has to be it." "It? Stop it." "To what purpose?" he croaked. "Why would I set you up?" "A gentleman's agreement? A family bet?" she suggested. His face paled enough to indicate something wasn't right. She retrieved her hat and punched out the crushed dome. "I don't manage your affairs. I never had one of those. Never." "And you never considered one, I'm sure," she growled. The man was turning her into the thought police. "Never. Never is a long time, and we all have them. Thoughts," she clarified. He was obviously projecting about her meeting with Morgan, as if that would ever happen. Darius puffed his chest like the biggest iguana. "Your mother's nymph parades are notorious," she said. "Obnoxious. They are cousins. Nobody has that much family." Still, Sophie had to wonder if his mother's entertaining every goddess And her nymph friend was the reason Darius was here instead of home in the bosom of his loving clan. The rims of her eyes stung. She dashed fingers across her cheeks to remove any wet that may have found its way there. "You don't believe me?" he said. "I'm infertile, not blind." Although she could be projecting too. Not that it hurt any less. Sophie hated being unable to function like a woman. Not something she'd ever say to someone else in her situation. She was speaking nonsense. So why was she beating herself up? Why did Darius have to hang his head? Her heart seized and bled and... No. Believing the worst of Darius made giving him the space needed to get over her, over their loss and her lack, easier. "Is that what this is about?" he demanded. "You believe I'd cheat?" Birds wailed overhead, and she was so done. But where to go? "You think I want some baby machine over you?" he whispered against her silence. "My lawfully wedded wife? My better half?" He slammed his stick on the dirt, and she shuddered. "You're my heart, Sophie, the pumping of my blood, yet you deprive us both." Her face flamed, and what hand she'd gained over him slapped her silly. "I think for us," she said upon recovery. "Someone has to. Logically, statistically, and with our best interests in mind instead of moments that pass. We make life out of moments, not statistics. Well, you've horned in on this moment, like the Cretan bull from that perverted myth with the poor Greek girl you told me about. Your women need to watch out for anything with a pulse. So you love me?" She wove her arms across her midsection and sighed. "I care. Disordered as that is. Reason would return and cool the rest. But you care nothing for Morgan's money or rescuing indigenous iguanas from the invasion of the American horde." "Horde?" He cast a glance over his shoulder. "Those monsters are iguanas, not Komodo dragons. Though I'm surprised you didn't cancel my Awesome Planet subscription." That must be how he learned so much and so little all at once. They're harmless, but invasive, and doing a job on the locals. So was Darius's swarthy everything. Delightfully dark, muscled, and dusted with hair that made hers stand on end. "Why are you here?" she asked at last. "Why are you?" Outrage turned his ears a satisfying red. He was angry now, and she'd take that over lazy baiting any day. Does a legitimate business proposal require a trip halfway around the world? It can. With Morgan? Why do you care? I want details, not empty declarations. He'd let her go. It could be competition making him act so crazy. And no mention of love had been made until he discovered she was heading to Fiji. "Why are you thinking the worst of me?" he demanded. "It's not the worst. It just is. Now I need to clean up. Makeup may not last, but the ritual would soothe her. Morgan will be here any moment. Then we can all get out of here. With or without money. It wasn't worth it." The confusion on her husband's face was her fault, just like their inability to have a baby. Certainly not the Christmas fun some predicted. "All get out of here?" "Think again," Darius said to himself. If Morgan dared to show up, he may never leave the island. 6 feet under was more likely. Darius knew himself. He understood his wife, and hot is what she was. She was steaming from the heat, sure, but the issues she refused to explore, foolish insecurity, needed clearing up. She may walk away from him in the end. Darius may end up signing her damned papers, but not without a fight. The shack awaited like a true mercy case. The mess offered him the chance to vent. He whipped up palms, twigs, and more palms. He choked the stalks with twitchy fingers while his jaw clenched tight, his heart even tighter. They'd lost a child. It happened. They weren't so different from other couples. They could work if they worked together. Sophie, for all his hoping, didn't want that. His family was an excuse. Real enough, but if Sophie loved him, if she wanted him, she'd stay. The splash of water he'd failed to pick up earlier filled his ears. Every hint of his wife's being with him, here and now, would take on meaning for the rest of his life. Agony or the opposite. He had a choice, even if he rejected the avoidance she proposed. Another crash of ruined foliage filled his hand, and the machete, Sophie hoped for, appeared beneath the mess, rusted and ready to use. He threw the load out the wall-sized window and picked up the knife to test the edge with his thumb. If this was their final Christmas together, he'd make sure it was one she'd never regret.